Well, good morning, everyone. Great to see you. Happy to be here. For those of you that have come to this event before, when I have spoken, you'll remember that it snows every time. This is the third year in a row where we've had snow as I come to present. So maybe the best solution to Great Salt Lake is to keep having Sunday night breakfast or something. Listen, I've been given a difficult job today. I need to talk about the Utah economy during a very uncertain time. And I have sort of summarized the way I'm thinking about it in this way. Pandemics force us to embrace a new world. And we've entered that new world. We've had to have a lot of economic resolve as we worked through the past 3 years. It's required that we be very resourceful, have patience, but a lot of resolve. No surprise that Utah and Utah County continue to be leading economies in the country and the state. As we have entered 2023, we have significant headwinds. And, whether it's inflation, whether it's supply chain, whether it's a recession, whether it's a slow session, whether it is a soft landing, we have all these plausible scenarios, and I can't, as an economist, pick which one's going to happen. Way too complicated, way too many variables we don't control. So what I'm saying to everybody is just be directionally correct, and then iterate around that direction frequently. And then I'm using the term breeze up, because I'm going to put some artwork in this presentation to hold strong. The economic forecast for Utah and Utah County is better than the vast majority of places in the country. Rahavi Roy is an author, and early in the pandemic, you'll see this quote is April 3rd, 2020. She said, "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next." So this is this idea that people who have studied pandemics know that it ravishes the economy, human health, institutions, and creates a very difficult place that you enter into. So I'm going to put some artwork in this presentation today, and I want to use art as a metaphor. So just a reminder, the metaphor is something that's representative or symbolic of something else, especially something abstract, like how we're going to think about the economy this morning. So this graphic, I'm going to show you maybe 4 different times, but I'm going to highlight a portion of it. This is U.S. quarter over real GDP growth, seasonally adjusted. And I've highlighted there 2019, circled it in red. And you can see these growth rates of 2.2, 2.7, 3.6, 1.8. And if you average those, it's about a 2.6% growth rate that year in real GDP. That is a healthy growth rate. And you might think of it as the tail end of the longest expansion in our nation's history. And they actually don't look that big on the graphic because during the pandemic we got these wild swings that are coming. But to pick a little bit of art that captured 29, I went with Claude Monet's Garden and St. Andreas. And, if you look at this picture, everything's in place. It's beautiful color. It's got, great human relationships. It's got a little breeze. The waterfront, people out enjoying it. If you look off in the far distance, you can see industry, all the steamboats, moving product and whatnot. It's really smooth sailing. Commerce is flowing, everything's working well. Okay, so then we go to 2020, and you get something very different, right? March 13th, something like that, Rudy Gobert, test positive for COVID, NBA postpones the season, World Health Organization declares a pandemic, and all of a sudden we drop GDP, minus 4.6 in the first quarter, minus 30% in the second quarter, and then we pop up 35% in the third quarter. This is the ravishing of a pandemic. Now, think what art you might think of for that time. I knew exactly what I wanted to pick. I picked the screen. So this is Edvard Munch. I think he's a German painter, and he's famous. I was looking this up. I've seen this live in like 3 different museums. I'm like, how does that happen? But there's multiple versions of it. But, you know, it's an image that's intrigued the art world for more than a century. It's been synonymous with existential angst. It even has its own emoji. And it's an iconic painting. But interestingly, it was a close call for me because I thought the screen, but then I also thought of Jackson Pollock. Some of you know, this one's called The Lavender Mist. But Jackson Pollock is always painting just chaos and also associated with existentialism. So that's the art I picked for the pandemic. I'll let you kind of think through that. But if we move forward to 2021, again, same graphic. Now, look at those growth rates in GDP. 6.3, 7.0, 27, 7.0. This is the rebound. This is all that money put in the economy to help keep businesses stay afloat, help families stay afloat. And so the artwork I picked here was Caspar David Friedrich's Wander Above the Sea Fog. And I think this is appropriate because things are good. You've got growth rates in the 6-7%. You know something's just not quite right. Up above it, as you look at it, you're like, this isn't going to last. You even have a walking stick, you know, trying to hold you up as you're looking over things. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the ravages of a pandemic. In this time period, you've got unemployment rate down in the 3.6 for the nation, 2.2 for Utah. You can see how it shot up during the pandemic and came back down. But you got some smooth sailing here in the unemployment rate. You also have unbelievable fiscal stimulus. So if you remember, the federal government passed all of these, you know, TARP and the CARES Act and ARPA. And it was both the Trump administration and the Biden administration putting money out. This graphic shows the .com stimulus. This is in the 2001 period, that's the top bar. It was about 0.4% of GDP. The Great Recession was so long, in part because of that. But then comes the pandemic, and boom, no holding back. 25% of GDP is put out there in terms of stimulus money. And you can all have your opinions about that. But we measured in economics household savings. So we know how much people would typically save, typical savings rate, and then we look at what it is during the pandemic, and it got as high as $2.4 trillion of excess savings. It's now dropped down to about 1.6. But you've got all this money in the economy. That's kind of fog. And then, no surprise, but inflation rears its ugly head. And when people write about why this has occurred, this is inflation all the way back to the 50s. Each of those gray bars is a recession. You can see us now at 6.4%. It's gone down every month since hitting 9.1% last June. That was the highest rate of annual inflation since 1981. The 8-state mountain region continues to see inflation rates that are outpacing what we're seeing here. And as you think about this, what happened is we have a pandemic. All this money goes into the economy. So a lot of money chasing goods. Then you have a supply chain that's constrained, that's broken. Either factories are shut down, people aren't showing up to work because they're sick. So in the process, you get all this money chasing too few goods, and inflation pops up. And Let me just show you the supply chain stress. This is a measure that Moody's does of supply chain. Just look at the red bar, that's the US. They look at all these measures of supply chain stress and create an index off it. So, people called it transitory because they knew that we would fix the supply chain. They called it transitory because they knew that the federal stimulus would eventually be spent and go away. There's always this thing they call the wage price spiral, that if inflation gets embedded in wages, then it's here to stay. And in fact, that's what we see. Okay, so I've got 2 more times I'm going to show you this graphic. I'm going to take 2022 and divide it into 2. The first is the first 2 quarters here, and you see 2 negative GDP growth rates. This is when everybody started to say, we're in recession. 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. And we're about ready to call it a recession, and then, you get 2 quarters of positive GDP. But for this particular 2 quarters, this is the painting I selected. It's got to be one of my favorites that I picked. It's called Man with a Hoe. This is Millet. He wrote of this painting, in a rocky place, a man all worn out tries to strengthen himself for a moment and breathe. The drama is surrounded by beauty. So, if you could get up close to this, I've never seen this painting live, but it's on my list. But if you just look at that face, the guy is worn out, he's exhausted. He's got a rocky ground. He's got a pandemic he's been dealing with. He wants to get through it, working really hard, but it's really, really challenging. And in fact, if you look at things like leading indicators, so when we look at leading indicators, they're looking at all these indicators that precede a downturn. They're not coincident to, they're not lagging, they precede it. And when this index gets below 0, the recession should be through, right? So all of those gray bars are recessions, and you can see when it drops below 0, recessions occur. So everybody's watching this, right? And meanwhile, you've got the Fed increasing rates because they absolutely will not stand for high inflation, even if they cause us all to be in a recession. In the February Federal Reserve statement said the committee anticipates that ongoing increases in the target rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. So we're 3 times that right now. We've had this incredibly significant rise in rates. Most people get a 25 basis points increase in March and another 25 in May, which is the next 2 times they'll meet. That's the man. He just can't get through this. So then the last part of 2022 that brings us up to today, now you've got GDP growth in the 3% range, which is healthy, strong. We're not in a recession. That 2 quarters of negative GDP growth was leading. And the painting I picked here is a Winslow Homer. This is called the fog warning. I love this painting. I've seen this one live. This is in the Boston Museum of Fine Art. But what's really cool about this painting, and if you kind of know how fishing happened in the Northeast Atlantic, I guess, but he's left the boat on the horizon. You can see on your right, there's a boat out there, to go get some halibut. And he's successfully got the halibut. See how they're in the boat. But he can see a fog coming. And he's got to get back to that boat. And you can see he's got white caps in it. And you kind of think about him maybe staying a little too long to get the halibut. Or maybe he's debating whether he should throw the halibut overboard to get back to the boat more quickly. So this is, I think, really a good metaphor for what we're feeling today, right? The economy is still pretty strong. We've got halibut. But we've got leading indicators in decline. We've got high recession. We've got rates going up. What do we do? Now, if I break down the CPI, this is the monthly. You know, you can do year over or you can do month to month. This is the monthly. And prior to the end of the year, it was looking okay, but then we just got a 0.5% bump. I'm really fond of this thing called the Animal Spirits Index. I think this is a John Maynard Keynes quote about eventually in the economy, animal spirits take over and you make unwise decisions. But this is an index of policy uncertainty, the S&P 500. They actually do some machine algorithms and look at major newspapers in the country and look how many times the word uncertainty shows up, you know, to get an indicator of how the media is feeling. And you can see that the animal spirits index is in the minus territory. And so we've got these known unknowns that threaten the economy. And I've just sort of put on a graph here the likelihood of something happening on the vertical axis and the economic severity of it on the horizontal axis. And trust me, sometimes when I present this, I move around. And I just sort of think, I think that's more likely now. But you could go move these around, but you could have Federal Reserve missteps. Many people think that's already happened. Heightened Russian aggression. Federal debt limit breach. Tell me that's not on all of our minds. After watching what the House of Representatives went through to name a speaker, their own party, and then to now have to deal with raising the federal debt limit, major cyber attack, stock market correction, forbearance cliff. This would be if your bank is kind of tired of being patient with you and they climb down. So we've got this pandemic has created a very uncertain economic environment. And it's so uncertain that the Utah Economic Council, in publishing their forecast for this year, did not do a single forecast but did three. That's called chickening out. And these are the three they did. So this is real GDP growth, and each of those red bars is a range, right? So continued growth, that's 2 to 4% GDP. The middle one, shallow recession, you gotta get negative to be recession, -1 to 1. And the decelerating growth, 0 to 2%. There's all sorts of things that have to line up for each of these to happen. The thing that I am most worried about is what I just referenced, and that is the debt ceiling. So this is sort of the history of the debt ceiling since 1975. The black line is the debt outstanding. The red is the statutory debt limit. The gray is every time they've suspended the debt limit. So they can either raise it, violate it, or suspend it. And lately they've been suspending it. But you can see that we've basically passed the limit. And now the Treasury does what they call outstanding steps, outstanding measures, to go stretch it out with playing with money to get us more time. But by mid to late summer, they'll be out of their extraordinary tools, and we will have that big argument in Congress. And keep in mind that even by arguing about it, by getting up close to the edge, that affects people's confidence in the U.S. creditworthiness, and rates rise. It's completely unnecessary, the argument. They've got to figure this out. And I'm really nervous about it. Should talk midsummer, Mark and Matt. Okay, so now let me just dive a little bit local here. I've got one more Winslow Homer painting to show you, and it's the one when I said breeze up. This is breezing up. It's also called a fair wind. And this is a beautiful painting, obviously, of some young boys out sailing, and they're doing pretty well. The sky's blue, the wind's strong. This is a little bit how I feel about Utah. And it's actually really interesting to look at. So when we talk about COVID and how it changes things, two macro measures to think about. How did you do in COVID? One would be, what's the cumulative case fatality rate? Deaths per 100,000 people. And then the second would be, what's the job growth rate? So a health measure and an economic measure. How'd you do? And the conventional wisdom is that if you wanted a low death rate, you had to shut your economy down, right? Limit exposures. Well, so here's the cumulative case fatality rate, all 50 states. The way CDC publishes this, they actually put New York City on it because it's so unique. So the one far left is New York City, just because that was just unbelievably challenging what happened there. You can see that Utah had the third lowest case fatality rate in COVID. Super positive. Hawaii and Vermont were the only ones with less. Now we have a really young population, and we know that this virus was really hard on seniors. But nevertheless, third lowest. But interestingly, when you look at jobs, we did extremely well as well. Second highest job growth, we just went from before the pandemic, February 2020, to sometime when we think the pandemic's unwinding, September 2022. National average growth rate, 2.9%. Utah, 7.3%. I have to tell you that the economy feels very different in many other parts of the state, the country, than it feels here in Utah. Now this is just a pandemic, but a good friend of mine, Natalie, economist, pulled together all this data from all 50 states, and he created this graphic. A little tricky to follow, but let me just describe it to you. It's job growth rates for every state in the country. The gray is all those 50 states. The black is the national average, the black line. The red is Utah. And what you see is this range of job growth rates. But look at the red line. Look at how well Utah does. It's almost always at the top three. And you'll see, I don't know if it might be hard to see, but in the middle you see a little gray line pop up. That's North Dakota, oil production. And then if you follow it down, you'll see something below zero that spikes. That's North Dakota, oil production. Boom and bust, right? You see the pandemic, the V-shaped recovery. Look at how Utah, the red line doesn't get as low as the black line. You do a lot better than the national average. This is the Utah economy. Durable, strong, diverse, nation-leading, breezy. The question is why? What is it that sustains us? Well, we have this demographic cushion of strong population growth that fuels our economy. Our population always grows. And you can see here, we've grown about 50,000 people a year. That's roughly Taylorsville, a little bigger than Mountain. Last year, we grew by 61,000. Now, Utah County, I'm going to show you some data on it, but before I do, just net migration. We are a destination of choice. We have now had net immigration for 31 of the past 32 years in Utah. You see that out-migration in the middle when it goes negative? 7 years there. This is when Norm Banger was our governor. I worked in the planning office during these years. We would go compute the population numbers and be like, out-migration again. Out-migration again. More people leaving than coming to Utah. It's unimaginable now. And you can see in our history, we've had in and out periods. But 31 of the past 32 years, that's a demographic cushion. A growing population correlates with a growing economy. So if we look at job growth for the metro counties, I just wanted to let you see Utah County leading the way at 3.5%. In some months, this is over 4%. But of all the metro counties, Utah County is doing the best. If we look at unemployment, it's got the lowest. It's tied for some, but it's low unemployment. If we look at population estimates, You can kind of look here, this is the estimates for all of the various counties. Utah County added 23,980 last year. And remember I said that the state added 61,000. A third of state's growth, one county. 3.5% job growth, population growth rate. Added the size of a town of Farmington to Utah County last year. And you ranked third in population growth. I think it was Iron County and Wasatch County on first. If we look at the fastest growing cities census to census, you can kind of look at these here, but they're almost all in southwest Salt Lake County and in Utah County. The blue is the 2010 census count. The red is the 2020. You can see how Vineyard is new. But, it has a growth rate of 8,924%. But you are in a growth center of the state. And if I look at the components of change for Utah County, so that black line is your population growth, always growing. The red is your natural increase, births minus deaths. And then the thing that looks like an iceberg, that's like net migration. And you can see that there's been periods, significant periods of out-migration from Utah County. But look at the last, roughly 5 years. You can see the type of growth pressure coming to the county. Well, so I'll come back to sort of a summary of this. At a certain time, pandemics change everything. It's required a lot of economic resolve and continues to. Utah and Utah County are the leading places, states in the country and counties in the state. We do have headwinds. I recommend scenario planning in this environment. And then stay positive, breeze up, because we've got it better than almost anyone else. I picked one last painting, and I don't know why I just somehow didn't want to cut this from the deck, but it's a beautiful Monet painting. Gene on his hobby horse. I think Gene is his son. But I thought it was a nice one to end with because it shows what we can be post-pandemic, right? That we can get to a better place. That we have endured. That we've survived. That we're putting together the pieces to prosper and to gain. So with that, I hope that's a helpful message. And let me just open it up for questions, and we can take a few minutes of questions here. Yes, please. Oh, Mike is coming.
Also, I wanted to say that the slides will be available online on our website after, so if you want to download those, we'll have those available.
Get you some great artwork.
With all of the population growth that's happened and is projected to happen, has your office done the math to say we have X thousands of acres in Utah County and Salt Lake County to be developed? And when we calculating that population growth, it's a simple equation to say X density per acre is what's going to be needed going forward. I'd be curious to know what that is.
Yeah, very great question. So we have done that in Washington County. Because the issue in Washington County is what is the land constraint and water constraint. And it's a county with a lot of public lands and obviously a lot of growth. It's a hairy calculation to make. You have to be going, basically parcel by parcel. And then you have to make assumptions and things. I think the state should do this. I think if I were to pick the next county to do it in, it'd probably be Utah County. But it's not been done. To my knowledge, in the way that you described. So another way to think about that is we've got all these growth pressures. We've got a housing industry that's out of balance, shortage of housing units, rapid price appreciation. Gotta fix it, and to fix it, you have to know something about these growth dynamics. Okay, another question. Was it too negative?
No. So, as a home builder, a lot of other home builders I've spoken with, several of us have a theory that there's a lot of pent-up demand this year because home buyers are scared of the rapid rise in mortgage rates. So a lot of them are sitting on the sidelines. There may be some pent-up demand that comes back next year in 24. And most of those home builders are starting very few homes this year because demand is very low this year. It also takes a long time to build homes today. So one theory is that next year is going to be another crazy housing boom where we have above average demand and below average supply. And I'd be curious if you think that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it is going to hinge largely on whether the Fed's able to get inflation tamed, because they will not spare any moment to keep raising rates if inflation's still high. That's their mission. So if they continue, so the way it's looking right now is that everyone's surprised they haven't caused a recession yet. And all the forecasts I read keep saying things like, it's increasingly likely that we might have a soft landing. And there's like no time in modern history where they've been able to have a soft landing, so it's like a pretty big statement to say that. But I do think there's pent-up demand. I do think people are waiting out. The question is, when will they come back? And I think that will entirely hinge on what happens to interest rates vis-a-vis inflation. Best estimate there, I think maybe a little later in 2024, not first half, but maybe second half. I think it's going to take more time. Yeah. Okay, who else has a question for me? It takes courage, by the way, to just open up to any question. Let's get it done. Let's see what happens.
So you mentioned a minute ago they did a study down in Washington County and it's looking at population growth and water constraints. Are you familiar with any of the water constraints that might be happening up here? Because I've heard that there might be more water appropriated to the Great Salt Lake, but I also know that places like Tooele are completely out of water, and just wondering if you're familiar with that and how that might affect the possibility of housing growth in Utah and Salt Lake counties.
Okay. What's the saying? Let's see, it's whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting. Do you know that saying? I also, remember that taught me the line, I'd rather be head of the church than head of the ditch. He's from Iron County, I don't know, but it's funny. So, I got this from an economist, lens. If we look at water use in our state, it's 70+% agriculture. 70+%. It offends some people, but agriculture is a very small part of our economy relative to all the other things. So, and then we also know that there's ways to optimize ag water. So I think what you're going to see in the state is significant moves towards conservation, because that's the easiest, best, cheapest place to go. And the legislature's all over this. They've put out, let's give numbers. They appropriated $265 million last year for secondary water metering in the state. So maybe not a lot of you are from Davis and Weber County, but they have secondary systems for their outdoor watering. You pay a set fee and then you water as much as you like. Of course, we don't like that, right? We want to measure, know how much you use, and ultimately charge based on your use. That's how my water works in Earth. So that's a big expenditure by the state. And they're just they have evidence that just by measuring water, you use less. They also are changing water law so that you can define a beneficial use if it gets to Great Salt Lake and you don't have to use the water. So you don't lose your right even if you let it flow through. Does that make sense? So there's all these things happening. What I think is going to happen is you're going to see water's going to become more expensive. Water's going to become more efficient or optimized in agriculture. There's going to be more ag to M&I conversions. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the types of agricultural products shift to be less water intensive. You're likely going to see a lot of changes in water loss, so if it's conserved, it actually makes it to the lake. They have to do a lot of shepherding, they call it, of water. Anyway, bottom line is the state is all over this. Governor Cox has said we will not let the lake go away under our watch. Speaker Brad Wilson has said this just might be the most important cause of my public service. And why are they saying these things? Well, there's lakeside industries that are at risk. That's our economy. There's human health at risk because as the lake gets smaller, it exposes dust beds that can get in our lungs. And then third, it's an internationally significant flyway, and its ecology is really important to the hemisphere. So I think water is going to change, but I don't think it'll be as disruptive as some people think. Okay.
Based on what I'm seeing kind of in like pop culture, it seems like what people are feeling kind of from the economic level is affordability at the individual level. And I know you showed one graph that I think it was like cumulative savings from like 2.4 to 1.6 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how you're kind of viewing that at like the local level in Utah and kind of how affordability at the individual level typically affects kind of the macro environment.
Okay. Well, so, the number people use is that this higher inflation is costing, the average year is costing about $400 more a month. Ouch. I think that's a little high from, my way of reading things. But household affordability is definitely in a tougher place. Goods are more expensive, services are more expensive. One of the things you have to reconcile, though, is if you own your home, or if you refinance during the pandemic and got a low rate, all of these housing price appreciations, cost increases only benefit you well. You're not paying out more. So there's a lot of things that are under-heralded that are okay for household finances. But who's hurting the most, in my judgment, is what I'll just call young professionals, young marrieds. Because they're paying these high rents or getting into an expensive home, and they've been hit with the inflation like others, and they will have a permanent wealth impact because they're delayed getting into home ownership. It will stay with them for the rest of their lives. And your question about how it affects the macroeconomy, it affects confidence, sentiment, and it also affects, like savings rates. People have to use their savings because things are expensive. So we have less savings, so what does that do? It makes it harder to borrow money. So it has all sorts of connections. It's a really challenging situation. Okay, let's just do a couple more. Yeah, please.
You mentioned that there was significant concern about the debt limit and how Congress would handle that approaching the summer. I wondered what your thoughts were pertaining to the deficit and the seemingly strong increase in that, and also how that is affected by the interest rates going up so much, so that accelerates that same.
Yeah, makes it more painful. It's easy for someone like me to say something because I'm not on the ballot. I don't have anyone voting for me. But they have to get on top of expenditures. I think the Republicans are absolutely correct that we have got to, cut government spending. And the question becomes, where do you cut? And what President Biden did in his State of the Union address was quite clever, said, some people want to go after entitlements. And they got everyone to boo. And they said, so you're not going to go after entitlements. You created like this false impression that they're in agreement. If I could wave a magic wand, I would go right after the entitlements. I would change the Social Security age. I would not penalize people that are close to retirement, but I would change it for people coming up the system. And I might even do some things with Medicare. Because I just think they're unsustainable, the way they are. And we're living longer. We have modern medicine that helps us be healthier. And I think it's understood that people can work longer. So I would like to see Social Security age change. But the minute you say that as a public official, out. Okay. I didn't get booed saying that.
We have, looks like we have one over here, and then we have one right here.
Okay, great.
Thank you for coming today. Last year, you had a number of demand in the housing market. You had a pretty defined number of demand that was out there. I think you stated there was a shortage of inventory. Do you have a nominal for that for this year, at this point?
Yeah, so at the Gardner Institute, we have a housing, construction, and real estate practice area. Many of you know Kim Wood. He's authored more economic papers in Utah County than anybody, over 100. And his colleague is Gardner Institute. Anyway, they're the guys that work these numbers. And when I came last year, I believe the number I shared was that we were 50,000 short. So we had a shortage, a housing shortage of 50,000 units. We have worked that down, and last time I saw their calculation, it was about 35. Might be a little lower than that at this point. So we're working it down, but still have a significant shortage of housing. And if you want to, go to gardner.utah.edu and then find housing construction, you'll see some of that work. Okay, Zach, over here.
I would be curious your opinion on this. I've been seeing more and more content, over this past couple of years around whether it's gas or lumber or eggs or any of these, big industries that the inflation, the price inflation has been more artificially created by industry greed and corporations looking for more profits. I'd be curious if there's any sense as to how much of the, inflation has to be happening versus, opportunistic corporations trying to kind of capitalize on sustained demand.
That is a hard question, right? Because it's almost like, we believe in markets. We believe that markets will make it so nobody can act monopolistically and, raise prices beyond what the market will demand. And then you get things like you see Exxon profits. It's like, oh my goodness, why are they making so much money? It doesn't feel right. So I don't know how to answer that. I'm enough of a free market person to know that over the long run, markets compete and we get clearing prices rather than gouging prices. But I don't think there's any question that there can be some profiteering as well. I've not seen a study that tells us how much. So, sorry about that. Okay, any last questions? Let's do two more.
I've heard rumblings in the past, or in the last year or two, that they were actually messing around with how they calculated the rate of inflation. Because I know the things I buy, lumber, eggs, seems like it's higher than 6% when I go to the grocery store. And so I don't know if I'm just not buying everything I'm measuring, or I have a different number in my head.
Yeah.
And it's not 6%. So can you comment to that?
Yeah, so it's the most quoted inflation numbers, the CPI for all urban consumers, and they have headline and core. Headline is everything, core is you take energy and food out, but headline is what you typically see, that's the 6%. The way they do this is they have a market basket of goods, and they have to keep it fixed based on because you're looking at the price change over time. So you're looking at this point and this point, you have to have the same market basket of goods both times. That market basket of goods won't be yours. It'll be the average. And so you will definitely, like I mentioned, if you're not, I own my home, I'm not buying any housing at this point. So I don't match that market basket of goods. So that's one issue. And then the other is, it's rather technical, but there's a lot of, if butter becomes more expensive, you buy margarine. A lot of substitution effects. If travel becomes more expensive, you might go to movies more. And the CPI is criticized for not responding well enough to substitution effects. And so they have other measures that you're often here. By the way, one of the things they want to see with entitlements is changing the way they do cost of living adjustments and entitlements, because they use the most generous one, and some people think it's not the most accurate. So they control spending by having more accurate measures of inflation. But I think the biggest reason you feel different is you consume a different market basket of goods than they're measuring. And it's absolutely consistent that your inflation number would be different than the average. Don't buy eggs. Okay, anyone have a last question for me?
Yeah, one over here.
You mentioned that when inflation rates become added to income, that those numbers tend to stick around. And I'm just curious, I know my husband's employer did an adjustment this year, quite a substantial one, across the board with all of their employees to adjust for inflation and cost of living. I know a couple other companies that have as well. I'm just curious to know, are you seeing that across the board around the state? Are we not? It feels like a lot of industries won't be, and then you're going to continue to widen the disparity between certain industries and others. And I'm just curious to know, are you seeing that across the board here, and do you think these numbers are more likely to stick around?
Okay. Well, we are, so two things that I think are important in your question. One is we absolutely have a labor shortage nationally, in Utah, and in Utah County. A 2.2% unemployment rate is well below full employment. If you look at the detailed data, super interesting, but the pandemic hits and labor force participation plummets. People withdrew from the labor force. And they withdrew in the greatest amounts in the 55 and older. So 55 plus population they've just come through the longest sustained expansion in our nation's history. They've accumulated a lot of wealth. The pandemic hits and they're just done. They don't need to work anymore. They can live off their savings, off their wealth, and they just fall out of the labor force. And it's so easy to measure because you can just look at survey data on, are you working, are you looking for work. You can also just look at a population employment ratio. We know the population, we know the number of jobs, and look at those ratios, and they just... Anyway, so we've got a major labor shortage. And when you have a labor shortage, you're competing for labor in a way that normally you wouldn't. And so you've got to pay a premium for the labor that you have. And so wages, the real wages have been going up. And in my opinion, real wages have been stagnant. And so we had to gain, and then now we've got the pandemic effects on wages. And so, yeah, it's really expensive to have a labor force right now. That's part of why inflation is becoming embedded for that reason. What I would say to that is this is such an interesting thing I'm seeing in corporations, but I don't see the labor shortage going away anytime soon. And what that tells you is hold on to your employees as best you can. You'll pay more of a premium if you lose them. And so what does that mean? It's all sorts of things. I do a lot of work with a national, I didn't tell you that story, but let me tell you what's important. Paying a competitive wage is super important. Having a great work culture is super important. And increasingly, they're finding that amenities in the work setting are important to people. Flexibility as well. But on amenities, it's this idea that people like staying home working. And for productivity reasons, you want to get them back in the office, and you got to make it really attractive to be there. And so what's happening all around the country is major employers are resorting out how they treat their employees and what they offer their employees. And I think it's really positive because it's investing in people, it's investing in human capital. And I'm a big fan of that. Okay, I'm going to finish up. Sound okay? I want to tell you a story. One time I was in Washington, D.C., and it was when Senator Hatch was voting, and I was with a group of business leaders, and Senator Hatch hosted us at the National Archives building. And I used to live in D.C., I lived 2 blocks away from the National Archives. I'd been there a lot, I almost didn't go. I thought I better go. You know, I was going to go see the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I'll show respect and be there. When I went there, they took us away from the lines of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. They took us into a back room of the National Archives, and there were tables and people with white gloves on. And I immediately realized this was going to be something special, because we have these archivists that had these incredible documents that were important in our nation's and state's history. We had some letter from Joseph Smith. They had the first inaugural of George Washington. You know, the real thing right there, handwritten. It begins something like, went into something, affairs of men, blah, blah, blah. And I went over to this one table, and there was a document about this size. It's like a half a poster. And it had these polygons on it, and it had all these lines coming in. I thought, what is this? Because it wasn't a text document. Polygons and lines. And on one of the polygons, it had O-A-H-U, Oahu. And I immediately knew this was Pearl Harbor. And the polygons were all of the Hawaiian Islands, and the lines were the jet fighters coming in from Japan. And the interesting thing about, so this is the original radar reading of Pearl Harbor, and it's like 7:10 a.m. they might mark, 7:13 a.m. they make a mark, and they just track this squadron coming in. But eventually the squadron, the marks stop before they get to the island. And if you know the history, what happened is they were expecting a squadron from California, and they just assumed they were arriving early. And it created the havoc that we know as Pearl Harbor. Anyway, just fascinating history. It reminded me, if you ever are invited to go to National Archives by a sitting politician, go. Because they give them special privileges. But even more, I just think it's a really interesting tale because, World War II wreaked havoc. World War II required resolve and patience. And there had to be an unwinding from this incredibly tumultuous world events. And I don't know what the situation is in the world right now. I mean, I kind of followed what Putin said this week and it didn't feel good. I was proud of our president to go to Kyiv. But as you think about the dynamics of the unwinding of a pandemic, geopolitical challenges, you just are reminded how important it is that we do our best every day, and that we be so grateful that we are citizens of the United States of America and that we live in the great state of Utah. Thank you so much.
We'd like to thank Natalie for, first of all, braving the weather and also for the amazing presentation that she's giving us today. Let's give her another round of applause. In lieu of a speaker's fee, the bank is going to donate $5,000 to the Kem C Gardner Policy Institute on Natalie's behalf. And we encourage you to do the same. We just really appreciate and all that they do for us. We also want to thank Rebecca Lester and Seth Oliver for arranging this event today. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you and the relationship that we have with you, and look forward to working with you in the future. Have a great day.
Thanks for the invite.
Hey, you bet.